Hi, welcome to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. It is Monday, June 2nd, and I'm Jessica Steinberg. I'm speaking today with archaeology and religions reporter Rossella Tercatin. Hi, Rossella. How are you? Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach, Jessica. It's good to be here.
It's good to have you here. It is day 605 of the war. It's the holiday of Shavuot here in Israel, which began last night, and Rossella and I will discuss some more holiday-related material, including the official inauguration of the Codex Sassoon, the world's oldest nearly complete Hebrew Bible, at the Museum of the Jewish People in Tel Aviv. On this holiday that also very much includes the story of Ruth, the Moabite, and her mother-in-law, Naomi. We'll talk about conversion in Israel and what that looks like right now, as well as how one kibbutz is marking this particular Shavuot. We'll also talk about Yaron Lashinsky, who was very tragically killed in a terror incident in Washington, D.C., and the Messianic community that he came from here in Jerusalem. So stay with us.
The law basically assumes that the enemy force you are fighting may not care about your civilians, but it certainly cares about its own civilians. What do we do in a reality where you're dealing with an enemy that the suffering of their civilian population is inherent to their war strategy? Now, that doesn't absolve us of our obligations. Hamas's inhumanity does not absolve us of the obligation for humanity. But the context that it creates, I think, is critical to the conversation, and it's very lacking.
I agree, but when democracies fight back against terror groups, they have to fight on two fronts. They have to both fight on the terms that have been laid out by the terror group, and the second thing you have to fight back is by preserving the norms of a democracy. We're forced to ask these moral questions about what we are and what we do, but based on an enemy that is not playing by the rules. But that's what we decide to be a part of by being the family of nations. And as Jews, we say, like every morning in our prayers, we say, Anachnu Amcha b'nei britecha. We choose to be the people of God's covenant, meaning we tie ourselves to an aspiration of justice and righteousness.
Okay, Rossella, let's start with the Codex, which you and I, as we were planning this podcast, we both talked about the fact that I remembered covering its arrival in Israel, its initial arrival. But of course, this was before October 7th, 2023, and the Hamas terror attack that changed everything. And you now, happily, I'm sure there was a lot of bittersweet in it as well, but you covered its permanent inauguration. And I want to hear what that was like and who was there and what it meant to do that now.
Yeah, so the Codex is now hosted permanently at the annual Museum of the Jewish People in Tel Aviv, in the campus of Tel Aviv University. Beautiful campus, obviously beautiful museum, very happy. And I mean, as I was on my way there, like looking into like what happened before this particular moment, you know, and seeing this date, right? When you reported like October 5th, 2023, and the Codex came from New York on this flight in the cockpit, and then it was supposed to just, you know, so you said your article, the permanent exhibit will open on October 11th, and then thinking of everything that happened. I mean, it was just like a lot. And I think, yeah, as you said, like, you know, a lot of people, it was a really festive event, because it wasn't just an opportunity to talk about, you know, the Codex, which is beautiful and moving and it's piece of really Jewish history and living history, but it was also an opportunity to talk about what is the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, for Jewish identity, what it represents for Jewish people and Israelis. And there were people like talking, you know, like there were TV writers and comedians and journalists talking about the role of the Tanakh in their life. But it was also really a moment of also like closing a circle in many ways, because former hostage Agam Berger was there with her mother, and I'll tell you why in a moment. And, you know, the mother of Aner Shapiro, one of the heroes of October 7th. So I think it was really like, my impression was that for the museum, it was a time to celebrate and to say how important this incredible book is, but also sort of like to acknowledge what happened on October 7th and how it affected also the museum's family and everyone else. So, you know, so before like delving more into what the Codex is, I want to mention that one of the reasons Agam Berger was there was that in August 2024, the museum hosted a birthday party for her, their 20th birthday
Right.
party when she was in captivity. And
Yeah.
and then when she came back, her mother shared, she found out that was the first time she was allowed to watch TV, and there was a report on a segment on the birthday party, and she saw her mother for the first time as she was in
Amazing.
captivity, and it was,
Wow.
you say, wow, like incredible, like what it must have meant, something that you could think, okay, like. I
Right.
don't want
Here
to say
she is
mundane
in
event,
Gaza.
but
Right.
yeah, what
Sure.
something simple, and at the end of the day, you don't think, well, we're having this birthday party, but what is it gonna
I
mean in
remember
the end,
covering the birthday party.
right?
Actually,
And so
there was a lot of music at the birthday party because Agam has been playing violin for many years.
absolutely.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So this was a little bit of the atmosphere, and then we, after this event, talking about October 7th, the hostages, the heroes, but also again something very like lively and concrete, which was Israeli journalists sharing what is the Tanakh for them, what was the first time that they encountered, what was their favorite character, their favorite verse. So something very like exciting and interesting. And then we all went to the gallery of the museum where the
To look
Codex
at it.
is on exhibit, and I mean it's like so moving. You see this beautiful book. It was actually open on the page of the 10th commandment that made me feel very excited about the fact, oh, this is the Torah portion that we're going to read on Shavuot, because on the Shavuot
Right.
we read 10 commandments. It turned out that then I double checked, and it was open on the Deuteronomy, the Varim version, and not the Shemot Exodus version, which is what we actually read on Shavuot. So I quickly checked before finally in the article, and I changed it quickly because I didn't want to say the Torah portion we're going to read on Shavuot. But I mean, it's incredible, right? And I mean, we know that the Codex dates back to over 1,000, even 1,100 years old, and because we carbon dated it, essentially, there's no date on it, but there are some notes about its history, how it belonged. It was sold by someone to someone else, and then at some point it was in a synagogue in Syria for at least like 300 years, and then when the synagogue was destroyed, it was entrusted with a certain person, and then it disappeared for centuries, and then it was offered
Popped up.
to this incredible book collector, David Sassoon, who actually, I think it was very beautiful because Herzog, the president of the State of Israel, sent a message and shared how his great-grandparents and grandparents were friends with the Sassoons, and how he's sure that they would have been happy that the Codex, is going to be
Ended
in
up.
Israel. And
Right.
also, a fun fact is that at the same time, actually, the National Library just received another Bible, only, 700 years old. So not as exciting, not kidding, very exciting. The Shem Tov
Right.
Bible, which had also a very similar recent history, which was also like belonged to David Sassoon, and then was sold at some point to a Swiss collector, and then now was bought and is on permanent loan in
To
the
the
National
library.
Library. They just inaugurated it. So two beautiful, incredible like Bibles that if anyone who comes to Israel should really check them out because it's amazing.
Right. Rossella, what I neglected to mention at the beginning of the podcast is that the holiday of Shavuot marks a few different things. It's an agricultural holiday, but it's also marking the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, and that's a big part of what goes on Shavuot, especially around the world, is a lot of learning, a lot of Torah learning, being in synagogue, saying certain prayers, and that is why, of course, Anu and the National Library inaugurated these two ancient Bibles at this particular moment. So
absolutely, yeah,
something good to talk about right now. So, as I also mentioned earlier, one of the complicated parts of Shavuot is the Megillah, the manuscript that we read, the story that we read about Ruth and her mother-in-law Naomi, and the two of them are left in there as a small family unit, and Ruth is not Jewish, and it basically is like, in a sense, the first conversion story of in a sense, of the Jewish people. And you wrote, tying into this, you wrote about what is happening with conversions in Israel right now, which has always been an incredibly complicated story, one that has no end in a sense.
Absolutely.
And one, of course, that we've probably spent less time paying attention to, certainly for the last, 19, 20 months. So, yeah, tell us what made you dive into this now. Was it, was it in terms of the holiday of Shavuot, or was there something that really sparked this decision to look into this?
So a little bit of both, in the sense that I have been looking into the issue of conversions ahead of Shavuot, because I really did want to, delve into the topic for a while. But what happened, and I have to say that conversions in Israel, there's not only like a spiritual, religious meaning. It's not just about someone's religious identity. It's very much tied into what people can or cannot do in the state of Israel. There's a bureaucratic aspect, because let's remember that, for example, in Israel, only people who are considered Jewish under the criteria of the chief rabbinate can legally get married in Israel. And these criteria are either children of Jewish mothers whose Jewishness is proven, or converted by recognized communities. So if you want to get married in Israel, and I should say Orthodox communities. So that's, it's not just about how, you look at yourself and what you want to be spiritually, religiously. It's about what you can do. And also very important for those who want to make Aliyah. Under the law of return, also you can make Aliyah only if you are the child of a Jewish parent, or the grandchild of a Jewish grandparent, or again, you are converted by recognized communities. Now, this recognition is very, very complicated, and everything that is connected to it is incredibly complicated. So as I was trying to delve into it, and first of all, looking into what are the avenues, what are the numbers, I have to say I was struggling a lot to get, actually the information. But what happened was that we weren't the only ones, thinking about conversions again on Shavuot.
Sure.
The Knesset Aliyah Committee, which is headed by MK Gilad Kariv from the Democrat, and Kariv is himself a Reform rabbi, so very, very connected to the issues of religion and state and all these topics, like scheduled a committee meeting on conversions for the first time in 2 years, like just 2 days ago on Wednesday or on Tuesday. So and what was good is that some data I had managed to find, and some data was actually revealed there. And it wasn't only data, actually, it was also like several people came with their conversion or
their stories,
lack of their conversion recognition stories, which was really heartbreaking. So I want to just give quickly, but so essentially what we have learned is that in the past 3 years, around 13,500 people have opened a file to convert in the conversion authority, which is part of the Prime Minister's office. Strangely enough, they work with the chief rabbinate. They follow the chief rabbinate's criteria, but so the stamp of approval on the conversion ultimately depends bureaucratically on an office within the Prime Minister's office, an authority within the Prime Minister's office. Of them, the number of people who completed the conversion process in the past 3 years, so we're talking 2022, 2024, was about 6,500. So about half. Now, it could be that some more have completed it in, opened the file and completed in 2025. It could be that some people who actually completed it in these 3 years started before. But
that's the basic number.
It's not a lot as a basic number if we think that in Israel there are over 500,000 people, about 560,000 people who are classified as of no religion, meaning they are Israeli citizenship. They came to Israel under the law of return, they are their descendants, but they're not officially Jewish.
Do we know if they want to all be officially Jewish?
So that's the thing. One could imagine that maybe not all of them, but of 500,000 people, probably more than a few thousand would like to actually be recognized as officially Jewish. Mm-hmm. But why don't they try? And if they try, what happens? Those are all very good questions that in a way, like we were trying, the Knesset Aliyah Committee was trying to find
To
answers
discern
for.
this.
But again,
Right.
we are talking about like a lot of layers of bureaucracy between the chief rabbin and other actors within this authority. Like there's also a problem right now. In the past month, nobody has been able to sign the official conversion certificates because the former temporary authority head is not in place anymore, and there's a dispute, a political dispute between Netanyahu, the Haredi parties, and the religious Zionist party about who should replace him. And so for now, like there are like over like 250 people who have completed their conversion, but they cannot receive a document that they did, with all sorts again of implications that they cannot change their status in the Interior Ministry and so on and so
Right.
forth. So it's a very, very complicated issue. I do want to also mention that some of the people who shared their stories are actually people who are trying to make Aliyah. They converted. They even
Trying to immigrate to Israel.
To
It's
Israel,
just,
try
right.
to immigrate to Israel. They're those who spoke are actually physically in Israel because they were told that they could complete their immigration
In Israel.
process in Israel. And what happened is that for whatever reason, their conversion is not recognized, even though some of them even got married through the chief rabbinate here because they're married to Israel. They were married to Israelis. So it's, if your head is exploding, rightly so,
Right.
because it's like,
you can't really, it's hard to even make sense of
possible?
it. Let's take a pause for a second. We're going to break. When we're back, I'm going to talk a little bit about a Shavuot story that I covered, and then we'll turn back to you, Rossella. So stay with us.
What surprised you the most discovering about Jewish life in the United States?
I think it's the pride. I think I was envy of that pride. Just being proud, being a proud Jew. It's something that I never even contemplated. I was just an Israeli. I think the fact that, in Israel, we have all sort of sectors in society. You kind of grow up with your kind. I hate that. The fact that I don't know a lot about my Jewish life, and I need to go abroad just to understand that. It's something so messed up, and how we grew up here. It's just, I think, once it got political to be Jewish in Israel, it made me kind of push away from that. Once I got to LA, once I got just being with my daughters abroad, just understanding what we are, my heritage, where we come from, our story, our values. It took me a long time. It took me a long time to get there.
Okay, this is when I interview myself a little bit, but I don't always necessarily write a Shavuot story, but this year one came my way that was this season that I really wanted to look at it because it really talks about how the customs were created for Shavuot and the kibbutzim, which is really very different than what happens in the cities, or how really what the customs have become in the non-religious, in the secular kibbutzim, as opposed to religious kibbutzim or religious communities, where the focus is very much on agriculture, on the agricultural aspects of the holiday, and many people talk about if they either are from a kibbutz or their family members are. That's where they want to be on Shavuot. They want to be there where they have all these kinds of ceremonies and everyone dresses up in white and they do it all in the fields and they have the tractors riding in and the kids all have wreaths on their heads and they do different kinds of folk dances, holding sheaves of wheat and baskets of new fruits. And it's very much about, again, like I said, one of the titles of the holiday is the holiday of the new fruits, the festival of the new fruits. So the story that I covered is about a kibbutz called Ramat Yochanan. It's in the north. And it turns out that Ramat Yochanan was one of the first kibbutzim in the 40s which had two members who really created these ceremonies that stand until this day.
Wow.
Two members, a woman named Leah Bergstein and Matityahu Shalem. Leah Bergstein came from Ukraine to Vienna. She learned modern dance in Vienna. She came to Israel in the 20s. Matityahu Shalem came from Poland to pre-state mandatory Palestine in the 1920s. He was a composer and a songwriter. They were originally living in a different kibbutz. They left it for ideological reasons, and they both ended up in Ramat Yochanan. But already in the previous kibbutz in Beit Alpha, they had been asked, they were both shepherds of sheep. And they were both very much influenced by their Bedouin neighbors who also herded sheep and who would do different kinds of debka dances when there were different periods, different seasons in the sheep herding and sheep shepherding seasons. So whenever they sheared their sheep, they would have these ceremonial dances. Leah Bergstein took note, as did Matityahu Shalem. He wrote several very famous songs. She choreographed dances to these songs. They did it at Beit Alpha, and then they brought it to Ramat Yochanan. Now, it's 80 years after the first official, they created several ceremonies, one for sheep shearing, one for the Omer, which is the 49 days of counting that begins on Passover, on Pesach, and ends on Shavuot. That's one of the other things that Shavuot, the holiday, marks. And they also created a Shavuot ceremony. And this year is 80 years since their first Shavuot ceremony. And a member of the kibbutz, a younger woman named Noam Edry, she was asked to create an art exhibit in the kibbutz that really looks at this tradition that was created. And that was actually very much influenced all the other kibbutzim and all the other ceremonies that have been carried out until this day. So the art exhibit brings in artists from outside the kibbutz, as well as artists in the kibbutz, as well as dance performances, and it's open through the month of June. There's information about it in the article that I wrote. The actual exhibit is called As the Sheaf Passes in English, and which is, very much marking Shavuot. And what it also made me think about is, of course, all the kibbutzim in the South, where most of the members are not living there yet or have not returned yet and don't know if they will, and how many, many people who survived October 7th or had family that was living there, they all talked to me a lot about going to the kibbutz on Shavuot and how this was, for many people actually, October 7th was the end of Sukkot, and some people hadn't been at the kibbutz where they might have grown up but moved away from, they hadn't been there since Shavuot. So, it's sort of circular, sort of brings us back to where we are. Of course, at Ramat Yochanan, they spoke to me about wanting to mark the 80th anniversary and not wanting to mark it, and how do you celebrate and how do you mark these things, but somehow you find your way through it all. So that's a little bit about Shavuot on the kibbutz, and hopefully what a lot of kibbutzim are doing today or did last night on Sunday night. So let's end the podcast with a difficult story. Rossella, you were covering aspects of the burial and memorial for Yaron Lashinsky, who was killed in a terrorist incident in Washington, D.C. with his soon-to-be fiancée. And he was a member of the Messianic community here in Jerusalem. And it's existed for a long time. I've had neighbors who were Messianic Jews here in Jerusalem. So I was very curious to read and hear about your experience, but let's talk about it here. Tell us what you saw. I think it was a private funeral, but they had another kind of ceremony. Why don't you fill us in?
Yes, so correct. So Yaron was buried in a private funeral. I did speak with the pastor who hosted it. It was, from what I understand, there were several aspects of Jewish tradition incorporated in the funeral. Odad, the Odad Shashani, the pastor, he's an Israeli man, Israeli born, 61. He told me, that essentially as he finished his army service in his early 20s, he was searching for the meaning of life. He had many questions, and he sort of like found the answer for himself into the belief of Jesus as the Messiah. And I say Jesus, but really Messianic Jews refer to him as Yeshua with his Hebrew names, and incorporate really a lot of like Hebrew, like they refer to the New Testament as the Abrita Hadasha, so the Hebrew name, the translation. And so and he personally knew Yaron. Yaron was born in Israel, but moved to Germany, where his mother is from, as an infant, and then moved back as a 16-year-old with his family. And the pastor said that he was very, he had a lot of deep questions about life and about serving God and about serving the country. And so they, and he was very active in their community. So the Messianic community, I mean, there are many Messianic, probably more than we're aware of. There are very many Messianic congregations, and what the pastor said is also like a lot of people and a lot of congregations are like prefer to live under the radar for what he described as religious oppression. Now, we have to say, in Israel, after the Jewish state, after the Jewish people were oppressed for centuries, millennia, in the name of Jesus, I mean, we also have to explain that for some people it's not so easy to hear about people believing in Jesus, and also Jesus. I think Messianic, the Messianic aspect has also some form of everyone I spoke with was very careful in saying that they do not actively proselytize, like they don't go and seek people to draw them in. They just share their stories or their ideas if people ask. But at the same time, if you look through some of their websites or some of their slogans, I have to say many of it was like changing the life of Israelis in the name of Jesus, like having an impact and in talking about the Gospels. So I feel like the messaging, at least in the English messaging in some of these congregation or like umbrella organization, which this congregation, which is called Melech HaMelachim, and is a Hebrew-speaking one that Yaron used to belong to, and Shoshani is the pastor of. This English-speaking congregation have like more of a like, I would say, proselytizing undertone, but he was very careful in saying that that's not the case for them. So he was describing all of this. What I did was that I went to the English-speaking King of Kings congregation in Jerusalem. That is a separate one, but it belongs to the same umbrella organization. It's called King of Kings, several congregations, both in Hebrew and in English around the country. I mean, I have to say, it was a strange experience in the sense that I went to this building, which is the Klal Center on Yafo 79, which is basically the first commercial mall that opened in Jerusalem many decades ago. And it used to be
Machane Yehuda.
Correct. And it used to be a very high-end place. But now, half of the stores are closed, and there's garbage in many corners and a bad smell. Some stores are open. They're like hairdressers. I found another small church, a congregation of people that clearly from Asian countries that were like, praying together. There's all sorts of things there. And like in the basement, there's this hall, this venue, very beautiful, where they met. It used to be the movie theater there. So I went into this basement, and all of a sudden, there's this 6-piece band and 3 vocalists like singing about God, and we're serving you, and they sing in English and a little bit in Hebrew and even Arabic. And it's like it was a very energetic ceremony. And there were maybe 150 people there. I spoke with some people who told me that before the war, it was definitely more, maybe 200, 250. Now it's a little less. And, when the senior pastor came on stage to give his sermon, like he remembered, like, Yaron and Sarah and how they were killed. And he actually was pretty upset that some people described them as Christians because they said, they weren't. It's like what they did was very Jewish. They found their Messiah. Again, a lot of people, I think, would take questioning the idea that this is a Jewish thing, but that's what they said.
How they view it and how they see
right.
it.
And, there was a partial reading, so a Torah portion reading with some verses of the Torah, of the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, and then on the New Testament. So, but they were careful to call it a partial reading. They recited the first verses of the Shema out loud. So it was an interesting, very different experience. Very different than what you see in Jerusalem.
What
it
day
was
of the
on
week was
Sunday. It was on Sunday, but the Hebrew congregation meets on Friday. So right before Shabbat. And actually, so some people I spoke to knew Yaron not well, but they knew him also because he belonged to actually the English-speaking congregation youth group. As someone who grew up in Germany, maybe that was also interesting. Sure. This sort of international vibe. So it's sad and painful. Everyone, I think, agrees that he was an exceptional individual, regardless of, how people view his religious identity. And, and everyone also expressed a lot of concern about anti-Semitism and anti-Israel sentiment abroad, which I think, again, is the real story at the end of the day.
Right, of course. And the subject, one of the many subjects that we think about all the time. So sorry to end the Shavuot episode on this note, but he's part of what we're thinking about on this Chag and during this period. So thank you, Rossella, for sharing that with us.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it. And thanks to all of you for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Rossella, thanks for being with me on today's podcast.
Thank you.
It's been good to have it with you. We'll be back again tomorrow with another installment. This episode was produced by the Podwaves, the video produced by Thomas Gersh. Any comments, you can always email us, podcast@timesvisual.com. Until next time, take care, be well, Chag Sameach.